I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, can we start with roll call, please?
Yes. Commission Chair Mike Etheridge.
Present.
Vice Chair Ellen Mallory.
Present.
Commissioner John Ebnetter.
Here.
Commissioner Ramiro Maldonado.
Present.
Commissioner Margaret Williams.
Present.
Okay, thank you. Before we go to the consent calendar, I would like to remind everyone that due to the physical distancing protocols in place at this time, we continue to encourage public participation remotely. Information on how to provide public comment is explained at the bottom of the published agenda online. There are two ways to participate. One is join the Zoom meeting by clicking on the link at the top of the agenda. Use the raise your hand button to be called on at the appropriate time.
I log into YouTube just to make sure that the stream's up and going.
Someone's not muted.
Yeah, Aaron, you're not muted.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No problem. And the other way that you can publicly participate is by phone, which can be done by calling 408-638-0968 with the conference ID number 817-8950-6746. When the item of interest is open for consideration, press *9 on your phone to raise your hand to be called on. These options for public comment will remain available until each specific public comment period is closed for that specific item. Okay, we'll go to the first item on our consent calendar, which is review and approval of the minutes of the Planning Commission meeting from June 9th, 2020. And I know that there was revised minutes that were emailed out today. Did everybody have a chance to review those, and did anybody have any comments or further edits to the minutes? Seeing no comments or edits, could I have a motion, please, to approve?
A motion that we approve the June 9th minutes.
I'll second
that. Second? Okay, thank you. Second. Can we have a roll call vote, please?
Chair Etheridge?
Yes.
Vice Chair Mallory?
Yes.
Commissioner Ebnetter?
Yes.
Commissioner Maldonado?
Yes.
Commissioner Williams?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. We will move to the public comment portion of the meeting. If anybody, any of participants or attendees would like to speak on an item not on our agenda, so not related to the Transportation Impact Analysis Guidelines or the Bay Meadows Phase 2 SPAR study session, if you do not have a comment related to those items, now is the time to speak and leave public comment. And I saw a hand that went down after I specified that it was not on. Do we have anybody that wishes to make public comment? Looks like we have one hand raised.
First speaker is Claire Lua. Claire, I've unmuted your microphone. Can you hear us?
Yes. So I wanted to comment on the agenda item 3, Bay Meadows Phase 2 agenda item today. Should I comment now or
Ms.
later?
Lua, this is the public comment for items not on the agenda. So when we get to that item 3 during the consent calendar, then we will have another public comment period for that specific item.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about the confusion. Any other commenters? Okay, seeing none, we will go ahead and close the public comment period. We will move to the next item on the consent calendar, which is item 2, Transportation Impact Analysis Guidelines and General Plan Amendment. And I believe Sue Ellen is going to be presenting.
Hi. Thank you. Let me just share my screen really quickly. All right, can everyone see that? Okay, thank you. Chair Etheridge, Commissioners, thanks for having me tonight. I'm Sue Ellen Atkinson. I'm the Principal Transportation Planner in the city's Public Works Department, and I'm here with our consultants, Damian Stefanakis and Fernando Sotelo from Kittleson and Associates to present on our draft Transportation Impact Analysis, or TIA, guidelines and general plan amendment. So an overview of what Fernando and I will be sharing this evening, a brief refresher on SB 743 and VMT and LOS, vehicle miles traveled and level of service. We'll go over our draft TIA guidelines, including guidelines for CEQA transportation analysis and non-CEQA local transportation analysis. We will go through some general plan circulation element amendments that are related to this item, and then discuss next steps for this work. So just a brief refresher, we spoke to you earlier this year about SB 743 and vehicle miles traveled. So I just wanted to talk through level of service and VMT just very quickly. Again, level of service is the transportation analysis metric that we've historically used when doing transportation analysis for development projects. LOS is vehicle focused. It focuses on congestion and vehicle delay. And if there is an impact when measuring with level of service, the typical mitigations for those impacts are vehicle focused. So increasing capacity on roadways, like through roadway widening, signalization changes, or intersection modifications. The state has recently recommended moving over to vehicle miles traveled under Senate Bill 743 that was passed in September 2013. SB 743 aims to reduce emissions through trip reduction. So the vehicle miles traveled metric focuses on multimodal transportation. If there's an impact under VMT, the mitigations are focused on multimodal options, including transit use, walking, biking, etc. So I went through a little bit of this already. SB 743 was signed into law in September 2013, and that introduced changes to CEQA, which is the California Environmental Quality Act. The goal of SB 743 was to really align transportation analysis of development projects with the state goals of GHG emissions reduction and a emphasis on increasing multimodal transportation options. SB 743 removed LOS as the metric by which to assess transportation impacts under CEQA. It did not make any recommendation as to what to do in terms of metrics for local analysis. This is just required under CEQA. In 2018, the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, or OPR, provided a technical advisory that recommended VMT as the new metric. It also recommended thresholds, recommended screening criteria. OPR's recommendations are not binding. Agencies can deviate from those recommendations if they provide substantial evidence. Compliance becomes mandatory with SB 743 and utilizing VMT for transportation analysis under CEQA as of July 1st, 2020. I will note that City Council accepted the OPR guidelines for interim use until our city's policy is adopted. They made that acceptance, earlier this year as well. So we are currently utilizing VMT for new development projects that are coming in while we're in the process of developing this city policy. And with that, I'll turn it over to Fernando to go through our draft guidelines before you this evening.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Fran Sotelo, and I'm an associate engineer with Kittleson. We have been working with city staff on updating the city's guidelines. And for the most part, the guidelines consist of two sections. One is the section that meets CEQA requirements. So that primarily is to guide the analysis under CEQA review. The second portion is to address cities' policies and local plans. With that, we looked at several resources, not only policies at the local and regional level, but also looked at OPR's recommendations, and we pretty much tailored the guidelines so they are in line with the City of San Mateo's policies and with the cities and the characteristics of the city. Next slide, please. So for the CEQA transportation analysis portion, which is based on VMT, it consists of two major topics. One is to how we address land use projects, and the other one is how we address transportation projects. So for the land use project will be primarily land development, a lot of times submitted by applicants. And we developed a couple of procedures to be able to screen out some of the projects from a detailed VMT analysis. So that would pretty much streamline some of the processes for small projects and other things, which we're going to go over in the next slides. For projects that do not screen out, then we would have to conduct the detailed analysis using the city's travel demand model. With that, we have looked at impact thresholds for the city to adopt, and we ended up going with thresholds consistent with OPR's recommendations. The city, we chose to adopt the county as the appropriate region for comparison, so our thresholds are compared to the county's existing average VMT per employee and per capita. So for transportation, so that's the land use portion. For transportation projects, for the most part, the travel demand model will be required to estimate change in VMT. However, a lot of projects can be screened out as they, and there's a long list of projects that are presumed to reduce or not cause an increase in VMT. So again, for the project cause increased VMT, we also have to consider induced travel demand. Next slide, please. So there's a flow chart showing the process, and for the most part, it's similar to what we have been doing in the past under the LOS criteria. But you see here the second box, it says conduct screening criteria procedure. So that's where we inserted a procedure which allows to streamline a couple of projects, which we're going to be talking about in the next slide. So again, the process consists primarily of first conducting the screening, and if it doesn't get screened out, we would have to compute the project VMT, which is the detailed VMT analysis, compared against thresholds. If the project is above the thresholds, we have to develop mitigations, and then we'll reach the findings if it's significant and unavoidable, or it would be considered less than significant with mitigation. Next slide, please. So here's where it gets interesting, where we can screen out projects to streamline a couple of small projects and other ones. So here's a flow chart showing some of the considerations given, and those for the most part are based on OPR's recommendations, and we did adapt them a little bit for San Mateo. So the first one is to, actually a bit before I talk about that, again, the goal for this is to exempt projects from a detailed VMT analysis, and the benefits of this would be to right-size the VMT analysis for a project, because we don't want to cause an unnecessarily burden to very small projects and have them conducting this VMT, detailed VMT analysis. So it's sort of similar to what we do with LOS type of projects, where we can basically require less sophisticated analysis. This would also encourage dense mixed use in field and transit adjacent development. So part of those projects get screened out in the process. So next slide, we'll talk about the small projects. So the screening criteria for the small projects, those are in line with OPR's recommendations, and this is based on the number of daily trips. We can screen out projects that do not generate more than 110 daily trips. So to have an idea what that would be, we added a table in the TIE guidelines according to the current trip generation rates. So we can screen out projects that are, like, say, 10 single-family dwelling units, 11 multifamily residential, or 11,000 square feet of office. Next slide, please. The second screening criteria has to do with affordable housing. We are deviating slightly from OPR's recommendations. OPR recommended to screen out affordable housing projects that are in locations near transit. However, to align with city council goals and policies, we decided to screen out all affordable housing, 100% affordable housing projects anywhere in the city. So that would allow us to streamline the CEQA process for this type of projects. They still, however, would be required to conduct the local transportation analysis, which we're going to talk about shortly. Next slide, please. The local survey retail is another screening criteria. So the reason for that is we assume that a local serving retail project would basically serve the local residences, and it would primarily reduce VMT as those strips would be confined within a smaller area. We built in some considerations to classify these projects as local serving. So the idea is you have to meet a certain criteria, and so 50,000 square feet would be generally presumed to be a local serving retail project, but we also have to look at location, project characteristics, and the goods and services provided. So we built into the guidelines some leeway for the city to make that determination. And so it's not solely based on area. What type of project would that include? Like, just to have an idea, target is approximately 136,000 square feet. We have Safeway of like a supermarket around 42,000. Trader Joe's 27,000. So that just gives an idea of the size of projects that we're looking at. Next slide, please. The next screening criteria that we're going to talk about is based on location, and these so projects within what we call high quality transit area would screen out as long as they meet certain criteria, and we can get in more details on what specific criteria is. But basically, the idea is that if they are within a half-mile radius of an existing major transit stop or high-quality transit corridor, you would be able to screen them out because of presumptions that they are efficient, say, projects from a transportation standpoint. Next slide, please. So for the VMT impact thresholds, this falls more along the lines of what if the projects do not screen out, then we would have to conduct a detailed analysis. So if you fall under that category, then we have to look at, is it a residential or office project? And then we use a VMT efficiency metric. So the VMT efficiency metric is based on either VMT per capita for residential or VMT per employee. And that's in line with OPR's recommendations. And for the city, we are going with 13.1 VMT per capita, which is 15% below the county. And for office would be 15.3 VMT per employee, which would be 15% below the existing VMT per employee at the county. For retail uses, we would look at the total change in VMT. So that's a little different compared to the efficiency metric. The total change in VMT would consider all trips versus the efficiency metric. We're just looking at certain types of trips. Next slide, please. Here, we're showing the VMT maps for residential, and this shows in the areas of the city that are below the 15% below, which, so that means that projects that are in green areas, they're in, say, efficient VMT areas, and they would be screened out based on their location on either high quality transit areas, which are the areas within those circles, or they're going to be screened out based on the type of project combined with their location if they're in low VMT areas below the target VMT. Next slide, please. Same with the employments. That map shows the green areas and the orange. So the idea here is if you're in the green, your project basically would be, as long as it meets certain criteria, most likely it's gonna be below the threshold. So therefore, we can presume that it's gonna have a less than significant impact without mitigation. If it's in a orange area, we probably have to look at mitigation. If it's in a red area, it might require substantial mitigation. So we're gonna have to look at that on a project by project basis. But this map is gonna assist the applicants and the project team to determine what type of impact may occur. Next slide, please. So here's where the mitigation is different compared to roadway capacity. We have been using LOS and roadway capacity metrics, and primarily the mitigation has been to widen streets and widen intersections and roadway improvements and that sort of thing. But now with VMT, the focus is going to be on multimodal transportation and TDM measures. So that's where the focus is changing. Applicants now would apply transportation demand measures for trip reduction. So there's going to be a set of tools that we are currently developing for the city, and we're looking at options that have been implemented by the city of San Jose and also by the San Diego Association of Governments. There's many TDM options that we can consider, such as transit incentives, transit passes for employees, bicycle infrastructure, anything related to shared mobility, parking management, anything that would encourage people to use modes not single occupancy auto, pretty much. Next slide, please. Okay, so we talked about the CEQA portion of things, which is focused on VMT, and now, as we mentioned in the beginning, we still want to address the city's local policies and goals. So we kept some of the LOS analysis that have been required. So that's basically to make sure that these projects are reviewed for consistency with city adopted plans. So we are keeping some level of service for a smaller geographical area. We're building to the guidelines some considerations, so we don't have to study as many intersections as we used to. It's going to be a more focused area to address access and circulation. In addition to intersection LOS, we're going to be looking at queuing, internal circulation, operations in the vicinity of the site, and other things, primarily for safety and circulation. Next slide, please.
That's where I take over again. Thanks, Fernando. As part of this item, we're also introducing proposed amendments to the general plan circulation element related to the introduction of the new TIA guidelines. Our current general plan circulation element is based on level of service. For example, there are two policies noted here that identify the thresholds for LOS that projects are expected to maintain, and then requirement for funding offsite improvements if there's a determination of significant impact under CEQA. Now that CEQA is based on VMT, that means that the city's ability to require those offsite improvements is limited because findings of significant impacts using LOS is no longer possible. Significant impact is a very CEQA term, And so we needed to recommend amendments to the circulation element in order to sever the tie between CEQA and LOS and to allow the local transportation analysis to be conducted in a way that's consistent with City Council direction, and also in a way to require those offsite improvements that are necessary beyond the identified environmental impacts. So that allows us to do the local transportation analysis and determine through that if there are negative effects on the local circulation network, and then require those offsite improvements if there are those negative effects. So the proposed amendments that were contained as an attachment to the staff report outline all of the modifications that would be required to the circulation element in order to make those analyses feasible. So in terms of timeline, we were before you in February. Since that time, we've been doing all of the research and work on developing the thresholds and screening criteria. And we're here in June before you for the public hearing. After this, we plan to have a City Council study session on the same items in July. And then we're anticipating going to City Council for adoption in August of 2020. So in closing, the staff recommendation for this item is to adopt a resolution recommending City Council adoption of the general plan amendments to the circulation element, and to make a motion to recommend City Council adoption of the proposed Transportation Impact Analysis, or TIA, guidelines. With that, Fernando, Damien, and I and the rest of the team are available for any questions that you might have.
Okay, thank you, Ellen and Mr. Sotelo. That was a very thorough presentation. Do any of my fellow commissioners have any questions for the staff on this presentation?
I have one question, Mike, for the chair.
Okay.
Understanding that we took the recommendations from the Office of Public Safety, from the Governor's Office, on the concept of affordable housing being one of the criteria for further BMT. What was the City Council's recommendation on why we moved from it being 1/2 mile from transit to being any place or any location throughout the city?
The recommendation in terms of screening for affordable housing was not something that was brought before City Council. We went before them with recommendations on how to conduct the local transportation analysis. So this is an item that's contained within these draft guidelines that we would appreciate Planning Commission feedback on. Since it is a deviation from OPR's recommendations, that is something that we would need feedback on, and if Commission is not supportive of that, then we can make those modifications.
Okay, and then even though affordable housing projects are screened out, they'll still have to do a traffic analysis, correct?
Correct. All projects would be required to do the local transportation analysis.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ramiro. Commissioner Ebner, did you have questions?
I do have some questions.
Okay.
First of all, Sue Ellen and staff, you guys have put together a fantastic package. I really appreciate how thorough it is and pointed and succinct. Good job. Thank you. I already went over some of these questions earlier with Aaron, so hopefully they can be answered relatively quickly. In the Transportation Impact Analysis Guidelines, attachment number 1 on page 6, at the last paragraph talks about public services, for example, police, fire stations, public utilities, and neighborhood parks. And they would be screened out under the presumption. However, this presumption would not only apply if the project is sited in a location that would require employees or visitors to travel substantial distances and may require a detailed BMT. So that kind of caught my eyes. thinking that we've got a lot of our public service personnel who do not live locally, and has there been any thought of looking at that data to see if those types of facilities might require a VMT?
I'll ask Fernando to chime in on that question, please.
Sure. So we built in, well, we actually say that these land uses can be presumed to have less than significant impacts, but at least the way that I read it, I understand that that's not necessarily saying that they will have less than significant impact. So we're giving some leeway to the city. Maybe we can change the wording a little bit. I think it's hard for us to categorize all possible projects in the TA guidelines. There's a lot of things that are subjective, or there's a lot of things that are abstract. But one thing that I think we have to keep in mind, the overall goal is to make process projects that are going to result in not result in a substantial VMT increase. When we talk about police and fire, I think the presumption is these land uses are in response to development, and they're not solely causing increases in VMT. I believe that the city of San Mateo most likely can look at those things, and a lot of these projects might be just relocation of fire stations and police, or there might be small increases in staff. So I think we're gonna have to look at on a project by project basis. I'm thinking that a lot of the fire stations, if not more, probably most of them, they have a small number of staff, and normally those shifts are very long. Like the fire, they're there for a day or two at least. So the number of daily employee trips is very small. I would think that we may be able to argue that those projects, they fall under the small projects category. So again, maybe we can revisit this and put some more caveats in here, but I think that we have to give some guidance in the TA guidelines, but not necessarily make a determination if all these projects can be screened out.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you for that answer. On page 8 of the same document, under the regional average VMT, there's a statement that says the VMT per employee includes trips for employees to and from their workplaces, including trips to and from points other than the employees' homes, but does not include visitors to the employment sites. The only thing that I thought was, well, if an employee is working at a dental or medical facility where there are numerous trips by visitors, is that looked at elsewhere? Is that looked in retail or something?
I think we still have to fine tune some of the land uses that are not the basic ones, if you will, that OPR recommended, which are office, retail, and residential. We're trying to fit in other land uses in different categories, and we're seeing different agencies recommending things. We probably want to be in a position where we have the discretion to analyze those things depending on the project's characteristics and the specific location. Again, we have to keep in mind what the overarching goal of the legislation is, and as long as we can justify that the project is not going to cause a substantial increase in VMT, we should be able to either screen it out or make a determination that even with a detailed VMT analysis, it's going to be a less than significant impact. I think for most cases, we should argue that the safest way to put it is, let's do a detailed VMT analysis and let's look at the no project versus with project, and we look at the whole of the VMT with employment, visitors, and all trips to make that determination. But I think we're going to have to find ways to screen out a couple of things.
Okay. On attachment A, the high quality transit area map, this might be a moot point, but since the Hillsdale train station is going to be moving a certain amount of distance, and I'm not exactly sure how, I don't know if that would change the layout of the high quality transit area in that one specific location.
Yeah, we will take a look at where that radius is centered and confirm the former station is currently closed, so we'll want to make sure that it's in the new location.
Okay, great. The next sheet is attachment B, which is the VMT screening maps. And the last indication shows a line, which is the priority development area, which runs up and down through the city, paralleling the El Camino Real. And it kind of caught my eye because where it's showing this priority high development area is in some neighborhoods that I don't know if those align with the general plan updates and if they have to align or not.
We checked with our CDD colleagues and they've confirmed that the PDA boundary for that area is correct. Aaron, do you want to share additional on there?
Yeah, I could add to that. We did check and it is correct. It doesn't necessarily mean that's where development will occur. Most likely it surrounds the El Camino Real. What it does mean though is you have access to additional transportation funds that could be used throughout that corridor. So that's why it was shown within the map.
Okay, great. On the draft resolution attachment 3, halfway through the document, it says, whereas the city wishes to revise its circulation element to provide that necessary off-site transportation improvements will be required if the city's level of service standards are exceeded. That wording kind of caught my eye, which doesn't really, I don't think, easily relay the idea that it exceeds in a bad manner.
Mhm.
So, and the last question that I had was on the 4th paragraph of Exhibit A of the of attachment 3. It says that the last sentence on item number four, it says the new development that would add 100 peak hour trips or more to the regional road network, and I thought we were following the state OPR guideline on that, and that number might actually be 110.
Was that in reference to the screening criteria memo?
Oh,
Attachment 4?
It's attachment 3, Exhibit A.
Okay. We'll take a look at that and ensure that it's, I'm not sure if I can switch back and forth between screens. We'll take a look at that and make sure that it's consistent. But we are, for the small projects, we are looking at 110 daily trips or less.
Okay, perfect. Again, great report. Thanks, you guys.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you, John. Margaret, did you have any questions for staff on this item?
I don't actually.
Okay.
I feel like there's.
Vice Chair Mallory? No? Okay.
My questions were answered yesterday.
Okay, yeah. My only question, I did watch the May 18th City Council meeting where you presented on this item, and I seem to recall that there was some information about other cities and what they were adopting around this. I guess my general question here is this: are there any cities or counties that are taking a different approach from how we're phasing this in?
The information that was shared at the May 18th meeting in terms of other cities was more focused on the local transportation analysis.
Okay.
In terms of if other cities were maintaining LOS or doing something different. I think that if you're interested in how other cities are implementing VMT, Fernando and Damien can certainly speak to that. But the May 18th meeting was focused on the local analysis.
I'm good. Okay, if we don't have any other questions from any commissioners, we can go ahead and move to public comment on this item, the Transportation Impact Analysis Guidelines and General Plan Amendment. Do we have any attendees who would like to make public comment on this item?
I don't see any hands raised.
Okay, we'll go ahead and close the public comment. Do any commissioners have any comments or items that they want to discuss before we go to a motion on the staff recommendation? Okay, I don't see any commissioners that wish to make any other comments or points because we have such a thorough presentation and background from Sue Ellen. So can I get a motion, please, on the item that is before us? Perhaps we can have what the request is up on the screen for this item.
Sure, I'm doing that right now.
Okay. Okay, would any commissioners like to make a motion on this item?
I'll be happy to. I would like to adopt a resolution recommending City Council adoption of the general plan amendments to the circulation element and make a motion to recommend City Council adoption of the proposed Transportation Impact Analysis TIA guideline.
Okay, do we have a second?
I'll second that motion.
Okay, can we have a roll call vote, please?
Commission Chair Etheridge,
Yes.
Vice Chair Mallory,
Yes.
Commissioner Ebnetter,
Aye.
Commissioner Maldonado,
Yes.
Commissioner Williams.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That passes 5-0. Thank you again, Sue Ellen. We will move to the next item on the consent calendar, which is study session. Item 3, Bay Meadows Phase 2, SPAR number 1, MU2 and MU3 modification study session, design review focus.
Just give me a moment to share my screen. Okay, just want to confirm that you can see the presentation. Great. Good evening, Chair Etheridge and members of the Planning Commission. My name is Rendell Bustos, Acting Senior Planner. I will be providing the staff presentation for Agenda Item 3, which is a study session for the proposed design modifications to mixed-use blocks 2 and 3 in Bay Meadows Phase 2, PA 2020-016. So some key points about the purpose of this meeting item. Wilson Meany, the applicant and developer for Bay Meadows Phase 2, has requested to modify the approved designs at 2 mixed-use blocks. I'll start with an overview of Bay Meadows and touch on the previously approved and the newly requested designs, and then highlight 2 main discussion points for Planning Commission discussion. Wilson Meany, again, the applicant, will then walk the commission through the design in greater detail. There'll be an opportunity for public comment as well as comment by the Planning Commission. And lastly, staff would like to note that no formal action or vote is requested for this item. So I thought it'd be beneficial to start with a brief overview of Bay Meadows because I think this is the first Bay Meadows for a few of our commissioners. So Bay Meadows is a 2-phase redevelopment of what was once a prominent horse racetrack facility, and it turned into a mixed-use transit-oriented development. So Bay Meadows Phase 1, which is outlined in blue in the graphic to the left, was approved in 1997 and is almost at full build-out, except for 1 vacant site at Franklin Templeton's office campus. It consists of an office campus, apartments, single-family homes, an anchor grocery tenant, Whole Foods, a gym, open parks, and several more mixed uses. And the second phase, Bay Meadows Phase 2, outlined in red, was then approved in 2005, along with the development agreement, EIR, and entitlements on a block-by-block basis. phase 2 is just west of phase 1 and was conceived at the same time as the Rural Corridor Plan, both of which focus on locating higher density housing and office uses closer to Caltrain station. So this in particular, the closest Caltrain station is the Hillsdale Caltrain station, and the relocation is shown in yellow, adjacent to phase 2 along its western side. So this map is a close-up of the phase 2 area, again consisting of several blocks. Blocks that are abbreviated STA are the office or commercial station blocks. RES are the residential blocks, and MU are the mixed-use blocks, which are a buffer between the office station and residential blocks. Phase 2 is probably over 2/3 complete. This particular application focuses on the mixed-use blocks MU2 and MU3 highlighted in orange. With the approval of the phase 2 area, the council had approved this phase 2 specific plan amendment to the Bay Meadows specific plan, which is essentially a standalone document, as well as the design guidelines and development standards. Within the specific plan amendment are a series of provisions related to land use, density, and all around goals of the phase 2 area. So this particular chart at the bottom of the screen shows the limits of commercial or office, residential, and retail land uses in the phase 2 area. So under the base program, Wilson-Meany can develop a maximum of 2.5 million square feet of commercial or office, 1,250 residential units, and 150,000 square feet of retail. They can flex a little bit based on market conditions and by increasing commercial and reducing the residential maximum, or vice versa. Regardless of the opted maximum, the specific plan amendment requires a minimum of 500,000 square feet of commercial and a minimum of 1,000 residential units. Following the staff presentation, Wilson-Meany will go into where they stand currently. So looking closer into the subject project sites, MU2 and MU3, shown in orange, are adjacent to each other, bound by South Delaware Street, Landing Avenue, West Kine Street, East 28th Avenue, and Derby Avenue, dividing the two blocks. They're both zoned BMSP, which stands for the Bay Meadows Specific Plan, and have a general plan land use designation of TOD, Transit Oriented Development. MU2 and MU3 are approximately 1.75 acres and 1.51 acres in size respectively. MU2 and MU3 are the final remaining vacant mixed-use blocks situated between MU1, which is the site of the Bridge Affordable Housing Development currently under construction, and to the south, MU4, which is completed. So shortly after the adoption of the phase 2 specific plan amendment, Wilson-Meany received approval of all blocks in April of 2008. So due to changing architectural interests, programmatic needs, and economics, Wilson-Meany has for some blocks requested a modification of the 2008 designs on a block by block basis. Most recently, the Planning Commission reviewed and approved the modification to the Station 1 and Station 5 blocks in 2018. And in some cases, Wilson-Meany did build the 2008 designs. But again, when needs change, they sought modifications to those 2008 designs. So this particular slide shows the original MU2 design, with MU2A being the residential portion at the top and MU2B being the commercial portion at the bottom. And this slide shows the MU3 design approved in 2008. Similarly, MU3 at the top is the residential portion, and MU3 at the bottom is the commercial portion along South Delaware Street. So under this particular modification, the applicant is requesting generally to increase the office square footage and to reduce the number of previously approved residential units. At MU2, the applicant is requesting a total of 184,000 square feet approximately of office uses, 7,500 square feet of retail, as well as an area with potential for a childcare facility. At MU3 to the right, the applicant's requesting 121,000 square feet of office uses and 5,100 square feet of retail. In terms of the residential components for each, the applicant is requesting to remove the 88 residential units from MU2 that were previously approved, and to reduce the units in MU3 from 76 to 57. Staff anticipates that the applicant will still be under the max land uses for office and retail limits and still exceed the minimum 1,000 residential units total in the phase 2 area. And again, following staff's presentation, the applicant will provide greater detail behind the exterior design and site planning. So this evening, staff is requesting that the Planning Commission provide feedback to staff on 2 main items, both of which are design focused. The first discussion item is on the building design as a whole. In particular, it's massing, material selection, and compatibility in the phase 2 area. So a bit on the proposed building materials. Generally, the architectural style is contemporary, probably much more contemporary than what we saw in the 2008 design. This design utilizes glass curtain walls, metal paneling, as well as concrete and wood-like paneling closer to the ground level. And considering the building designs, the commission should also consider the fact that at build out, the designs were more contemporary generally than the design guidelines had originally conceived, which were a little more traditional. You could probably attribute that to the fact that, you know, building designs informed by its context, and given the identity now of phase 2, the context had become more contemporary than originally imagined in 2008 possibly. So the second discussion point for the Planning Commission is on the applicant's list of requested exceptions to the phase 2 design guidelines. So as mentioned previously, the council adopted the phase 2 guidelines and development standards to provide a set of standards for physical development of the various blocks. The guidelines mention that the design for each station is not required to comply with all provisions. Rather, the applicant can request exceptions and provide justifications for them. And it's on the applicant to demonstrate how the design is consistent with the guidelines and specific plan overall, even with those exceptions. Historically, all phase 2 blocks were approved with some exceptions to the guidelines, which is based on the fact that the guidelines were shaped prior to even knowing, you know, what the physical buildings would look like and how they'd be laid out. Staff report included attachment 7, which is the list of exceptions in greater detail, which generally relate to the building location, massing, and setbacks. And then staff included in attachment 6, to provide the commission with the list of the design exceptions approved for the 2008 designs. So again, to recap briefly, staff's requesting feedback on the building design as a whole, and as well as whether the design exceptions result in an overall improvement of the design. And lastly, on the next steps, because this item is pre-application, the applicant will have the opportunity to revise the design based on feedback from the commission and the public prior to filing their SPAR modification. Staff will review that modification and conduct environmental review prior to a public hearing by the Planning Commission for action on the application. So this concludes staff's presentation. I, as well as Lisa Costa-Sanders, who's co-planner on the project, is available for questions. We also have city staff and public works for questions, and the applicant, Wilson Meany, and their design team will also be providing presentations. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Can we go ahead and have the applicant presentation, and then we'll go to the commissioner questions.
Good evening, commissioners. My name is Janice Thatcher. I'm with Wilson Meany, developers of Bay Meadows. We're here tonight to propose a SPAR modification for mixed-use blocks 2 and 3, as Rendell said. To give you a brief overview of Bay Meadows today, the project is approximately 2/3 complete. We have 777 homes with 1,800 residents, 3 office buildings, which are fully leased to high-quality tenants, retail stores, including Fieldworks Brewery, Rome, Blue Bottle, Lift Fitness, and Tin Pot Creamery. The transit-oriented development is working. According to our surveys, over 40% of the residents commute via Caltrain. The Station 4 garage, roughly 2/3 full, as over half of the SurveyMonkey employees and their subtenants take alternative modes of transportation. The project is compliant with traffic requirements, including the Traffic and Parking Management Plan, as well as the TMA's annual parking study. We currently have several buildings under construction or about to start, including over 200 homes and 2 office buildings that, at stations 1 and 5. The proposed SPAR for MU2 and 3 is consistent with all project approvals, including the development agreement, specific plan amendment, design guidelines, and traffic controls. As a reminder, pursuant to the development agreement, Bay Meadows has made significant contributions to the city, including 15 acres of public parks, land for the bridge housing development, and over $12 million in impact fees. The SPAR process is required to ensure consistency with the design guidelines and development controls. As Randall noted, the project consists of 2 office buildings totaling 317,000 square feet, 57 apartments, which include 6 affordable homes. Retail active use along Delaware Street and a location for childcare along Kine. Project's compliant with the city's 55-foot height limit and includes predominantly underground parking. We have completed a preliminary traffic analysis, which indicates that the project is consistent with the trip budgets established for the project. In summary, at completion with the proposed SPAR amendment, we would have 1,038 homes, which is within the limit of 1,000 to 1,500 approved for phase 2. And we would have 1.2 million square feet of office space, which is again within the range of 1 million to 1.5 million approved previously. I would now like to introduce Nicole Lemons of Hart-Howerton, who is going to provide some additional context. Thank you.
Thank you, Janice. Thank you to the chair and the commissioners. As Janice noted, I'm Nicole Lemons. I'm with Hart-Howerton, a principal at Hart-Howerton, and along with my colleague, Paul Milana, who you will be hearing from shortly. We've been working with the city, with Wilson Meany and a team of architects and landscape architects at Bay Meadows since 2000, with specific plan amendment, design guidelines, architectural design, as well as working with the city as it's been built out over time. The Bay Meadows Master Plan is designed to integrate a transit-oriented development into the fabric of San Mateo, providing open space and 15 acres of parks to serve the community, and sets forth a vision to create a community setting that would first and foremost consider the public, the pedestrian, provide for the needs of the community with a mix of uses within a walkable neighborhood, clustered development with the higher density uses conveniently accessible to transit, and create alternate ways to move through and experience the community, be it on bike or on foot. Today, we are focusing on the 2 mixed-use blocks highlighted in yellow on your screen. The proposed development of these 2 blocks will bridge 2 settings. The station blocks, where a variety of tenants that you know, SurveyMonkey, OpenText, Workday, are currently in place, and Delaware Street, to Landing Green Park, the setting for the Nueva School, multifamily housing, and multifamily residential that's currently under construction. There are a number of approvals in place that set the design standards and guidelines to ensure the development meets the objectives of the specific plan. These are the criteria for evaluation of designs that conform to a commonly held vision and set of expectations, with particular attention to those aspects of design seen and experienced by the public. We commonly refer to that as the public realm. Components of these guidelines, such as those noted here, direct and instruct the developer, designers, the architects with regard to how a building should be designed within the context of a larger community, so that all buildings recognize and contribute to a larger pattern and a sense of place, becoming part of the daily life as the backdrop for where life happens at Bay Meadows. Dwight Long from Perkins & Will now walk through the design of the office components.
Thanks, Nicole, for that great overview of the planning and design guidelines. And thanks, commissioners, for having us here tonight. I'm Dwight Long from Perkins & Will, the architect for the MU2 and MU3 office buildings. This is an aerial view looking southeast from the prominent corner of Delaware and 28th. You can see both the MU2 and MU3 properties in relationship to the station blocks across the street. Sorry. I'm going to give you an overview of how the buildings now relate to their surrounding neighbors. Starting with the plan relationships on the right, you can see that MU2 and MU3 have plan relationships to the station blocks. This holds true for both the massing and the building entries. Both buildings come forward to meet the street along Delaware from a retail and active use programs. This provides a nice complement to the open spaces of the station blocks across the street. The left-hand images show the building's massing organization. Both buildings consistently use a base, middle, and top composition, where the base and top are generally set back to help break down the overall scale of the building. The continuous setback ground level street activation is highlighted in yellow. I'll now give a quick plan overview of the program and features related to each building and plan. Starting on the left with MU2, the ground floor plan consists of a mix of office, retail active use, parking, and potential childcare. Retail active use along Delaware is shown in yellow. The potential childcare location on the park side is shown in blue, and bike parking, conveniently located near the building's entries, is shown in violet. For MU2, the garage entry and loading are off of Derby. There's a single level of parking on the south side of the building that leads to a 3-level underground garage. MU2's primary entry is set back off of Delaware with a large landscape courtyard approach to the lobby. There is a secondary entrance off of Kine that in turn links the lobby to the park. For MU3 on the right, the floor plan consists of a mix of ground floor office and retail active use along Delaware, shown in yellow. Bike parking, shown in violet, is in close proximity to the pedestrian entry. There is also bike parking in the residential portion that Paul will show you in a minute. The building's primary entry is set back off of Delaware and is located directly adjacent to the pedestrian passage. For MU3, the garage entry and loading are off landing. Vehicular entry leads to a 2-level underground garage, shown here. The plan of parking is there's two levels of underground parking under MU3 with dedicated residential parking, and 3 levels of underground parking on MU2. I'm going to now show some exterior views of the building to describe the architectural approach for the office buildings. We start with a view looking from the prominent corner of Delaware and 28th Avenue. In general, the buildings share a similar massing, material, and facade patterning approach. We've used a lighter, more transparent material vocabulary in contrast to the more solid station blocks to serve as a bridge between the station blocks and the residential neighborhood to the east. In terms of massing, as I said before, the top and base of the buildings generally set back to reduce the perceived mass of the building, shown here at the ground floor retail active use in the street and the 4th floor terrace to provide social spaces along Delaware. The facades range from a clean glass facade here at the corner of Delaware to introduction of refined vertical metal panels accents that provide a rhythm to the facade as one moves around the building. This is shown here on 28th, where the panels help to break down the scale of the facade as one moves towards the park. Lastly, the building forms are consistently framed and highlighted by broad roof eaves clad in natural wood to create a soft, warm surround of the glazed facades. This view along Delaware, looking north, shows a setback of the ground level retail active use, as well as how the massing steps down to 3 levels along the frontage to form an outdoor terrace for the 4th floor. The entry for MU2 is set back from the street with a landscape courtyard and provides a visual connection to the park beyond. Moving on to MU3, this is a view from the corner of Derby and Delaware, showing the continuation of the language from MU2 using setbacks, a varied but rhythmic pattern of metal panel inserts, and facades framed by warm wood eaves. This is a view of MU2 along Kine looking toward 28th, where the massing setbacks and large wood eaves are meant to break down the scale of the facade on the park and more residential side. This view also shows the potential childcare play space kind of in the middle there, and a secondary entrance along Kine. This slide is a summary of the materials we're proposing to use for the office buildings. As I said before, we look to give the office buildings a lighter material feel than the station blocks, so we've chosen a glass that is brighter and more silver in quality. The retail storefronts will be clear, low iron glass. The glass facades are in turn punctuated by the silver gray vertical metal panels shown as number 3 here in this diagram. The Wormwood soffit is natural exterior wood paneling system, and there is a small quantity of solid walls around the base, usually related to the service areas. We are using a board form concrete panel material at these locations. That's number 5. The buildings are topped with a metal mechanical screen material that matches the station block buildings across the street. And now I'm going to hand it over to Paul Milana to present the residential project.
Thank you, Dwight, Chair Etheridge, and members of the Planning Commission. My name is Paul Milana. I'm a partner at Hart Howerton, and we are the architects for the residential building on Block MU3. When we set out to design the residential building, our inspiration came from the iconic row houses that are ubiquitous across the Bay Area, often featuring a prominent projecting bay window with their vertical rhythms that create so many cherished streetscapes throughout the region. As you can see from the ground floor plan, the residential building is separated from the office building along Delaware Street by a north-south walkway. Additionally, the required mid-block pedestrian passage, here highlighted in a rose color, runs east-west through the 2 buildings, facilitating greater access from Landing Green to Delaware and to the Caltrain platform. The floor plan shows how most of the units look directly over Landing Green Park, many of which have private outdoor terraces. There's also shared outdoor space and bike storage room along the north-south walkway, as well as a roof deck, which we will show you in a moment. As Dwight mentioned, there are 68 parking spaces located below grade. Access is shared with the office building along Landing Avenue to minimize curb cuts, but the residential parking is gated. Direct access to the residential floors is provided via elevators and stairs, and there is additional bike parking and a pet washing station located at this level. The elevation along Kine Street, we see how the vertical row house inspired massing is accentuated through the choice of materials. Primary walls are an off-white stucco, while the private step-out terraces are dark gray lapped siding. Projecting bay windows form vertical rhythms across the facade. In the lobby entry, bay window composition and roof shade structure at the center of the building form an architectural feature marking the entrance to the mid-block passage. Looking at some of the design features of the building, we see the mid-block passage shaded by a broad overhanging canopy with the building identification overhead, as well as the composition of the lobby glazing, the bay windows, and the shade structure at the roof as an architectural feature. Along Kine Street, the broad canopy clearly marks the entrance to the building in the mid-block passage, and the layered landscape terraces and projecting bay windows help to give human scale to the building at street level. There are many housing options at Bay Meadows today. With this building, a new type of residential unit will be offered. The 4th floor units have additional ceiling height with loft space, some as sleeping lofts and others as bonus rooms. And this view shows how the architecture of the residential building evokes a time-honored housing type in the Bay Area, while clearly being a contemporary building that complements the range of architectural expressions currently existing at Bay Meadows and along Landing Green Park. And this view along Derby Avenue illustrates how the building bridges the scale of the office buildings along Delaware with a break for the north-south walkway, and then the massing builds up again to Landing Green with the use of the loft unit. As for the exterior materials, the primary wall material is an off-white stucco. It is accented with the dark gray lap siding at the terraces. Window frames are dark with clear glass. There are a range of dark gray metal elements for the terrace structure. a gray stained porch ceiling, and glass handrail at the roof deck to maximize views. Now I'd like to introduce Nico Wright with CMG Landscape Architecture.
Thank you, Paul. Good evening, commissioners. My name is Nico Wright with CMG Landscape Architecture. CMG has been involved with the planning, design, and construction of the Bay Meadows community from the beginning of its development. When we embarked on the planning for Bay Meadows, we conceived of the streets and open spaces as a continuous network of parks that would be a great place to walk, bike, stroll, and gather in. And that has led us to the creation of a variety of public spaces, from beautiful pedestrian paths and sidewalks to the community garden, playground, large park, and beer garden you see here. At the MU2 and 3 sites, we are integrating the office and residential buildings into the sidewalks, connecting the buildings to the walkable landscapes that connect the neighborhood. Generous entry plazas lead into the office building in MU2, and pedestrian passageways with rich planting connect the MU3 block to the sidewalks and park around it. Our approach to the planting is to continue the principles of embedding ecology, habitat, and water conservation throughout the landscape of the neighborhood, and provide delight for people through rich garden spaces full of flowering trees to textured planting. The planting palette is selected for its drought tolerance, low maintenance, and benefit to ecological and habitat value. At the MU2 office building, a social plaza, shown on the left, invites people into the building off of Delaware Street and offers a place to pause and people watch out onto the activities on the social street under the shade of a stand of sweet gum trees. On the right shows the garden courtyard along Kine Street that provides a place of respite with bike parking adjacent to the building lobby. The garden courtyard will be a wonderful place for office workers to take their lunch around a grove of maple trees. At the MU3 office and residential building, the pedestrian passage will lead through the buildings, connecting it to amenities on Delaware Street and Landing Green Park on Kine Street. Residents entering from Kine will be able to pass straight through the passageway with their bicycles to access the secure bike parking off of the courtyard. Where the pathways join, there's a garden of flowering trees, shade trellises, and bicycle parking as shown on the left. There are small social spaces for meeting within this courtyard around a flowering dogwood tree. And we are thrilled to bring these buildings and their landscapes to complete the neighborhood of Bay Meadows. Thank you, commissioners, for your time, and I believe that completes our design presentation.
Okay, thank you. Is that the full presentation from the applicant?
Yes, it is. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you. Before we go to public comment, we'll go to questions from the commissioners. Who would like to start? Questions for staff or the applicant?
I could start.
Okay, Commissioner Williams.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let's see, that was a lot to take in. So hopefully my notes and questions won't be too disjointed, but let's see, a couple of questions. First of all, there was reference in, I think, the staff report, the staff presentation to land put aside or land associated with the bridge project. And I don't recall what that is or where that is. Could you guys provide me a little more information about that?
Sure. So the bridge affordable housing site is also known as MU1, which is just north of the MU2 site. So if I could pull up a map briefly.
So is that the project that's next to Nueva?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Oh, thank you. For
Yeah.
going to pull it up. Right.
Okay, and I think that's in construction right now.
Yes.
Okay, thanks. That's good to know. Oh, another question I had, I think this is for staff. You know, with regards to the guideline, design guideline deviations, there was one of the items, I mean, I generally know what this means, but I kind of want to know more specifically what build to zone means.
So build to zone is essentially the requirement for a wall to meet a certain line.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's a 0 build to zone, then the property line, then it's required to build to the property line.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. going to have a few other questions, but one of the things I often comment on is shadow studies. So is a shadow study, particularly my concern or thoughts are about the Landing Green Park and the shadow studies. So is that something that would be done before the final application or the next process?
It's not a submitter requirement of the planning department currently, but if the commission's interested in asking of that, I think the applicant would be amenable.
Mm-hmm. I would just be curious to know how these projects, how these buildings affect Landing Green Park. Because I went by today and walked around a bit, and this comment for the landscape architect, that is just lovely, lovely park. It looks beautifully maintained right now too. I mean, everything looks really great. Okay, let's see if there's any other questions. Okay, I don't know if this is the right time to clarify this. Maybe this is more of a design comment question, but it's clear that the roof feature, so this would be for the architects of the residential project. The roof feature that is part of the residential project, per the design guidelines, is offset from the pedestrian passage, obviously intentionally. And I'm just curious what the thinking is there. I like that. I mean, I think I like that, but it's just not what's expected. So I was just wondering if there was any specific reasons for that.
Sure. This is Paul Milano with Hart Howardson. It was, we studied many configurations for the massing along Landing Green, and we really liked the ability to be able to link the glazing of the lobby area, the bay window element that you see then on the next 3 floors, and a shade structure on top of that composition to become an architectural feature that marks from some distance the passage and entry to the building. And then to balance that, we added the canopy with the cable support that you see in that view, so that it is an asymmetrical composition, but we think the asymmetry in this case is balanced, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was another image of it that showed, yeah, right there. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that. Okay, I have one last question for clarification. In looking at the floor plans, the loft spaces, bonus rooms or whatever, I was just curious, did those have closets? I couldn't tell from the plans that easily. I don't know if it was in this presentation, it was in the packet I got. I don't think it showed here either, but anyway, is there any reason why they wouldn't have closets, I guess?
I believe they have closets, but Nicole, please correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Sorry. Any of the lofts that are sleeping units have sleeping lofts have closets.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I think that's all the questions I have. Let me just double check. Yeah, that's all that I have.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Williams. Questions, clarifying questions for staff or applicant? Yes, Commissioner, Vice Chair Mallory.
My question is for Ms. Thatcher. I would like to hear your thought process for making these changes and your reasoning behind it.
Sure. Yes. So one of the underpinnings of the entitlements for Bay Meadows was to provide flexibility for long-term development as either these blocks specifically as either residential or office. And based on the market today and the the mixed use nature of the development, we think that office is supportive of the other uses, predominantly the public transit and the retail that's so important to the community at Bay Meadows. By having the additional the total 317,000 square feet of office space brings a lot of workers to the area, which helps to support the commercial uses. So that's really our thinking behind it.
And when did you start this thought process? It had to have been a while back.
Yeah, I mean, it's been something we've been studying over the last year or so, and we've been working with the design team. You know, as you noted on the previous SPAR, we had two separate buildings. So there was a residential building that was lined on the east side of the block across from the Landing Green Park. And then there were small 2-story buildings on the east side of the street, which had retail and commercial on the second floor. That was originally designed back in 2008 because prior to the commencement of the grade separations, the project had a much lower trip budget. So we were not able to build out all of the space. And so as you see on the west side of the street, those buildings, there were also bar buildings along the west side of the street. Now, as the grade separations are nearing completion, we have a higher trip budget, and having the ability to build a building which fills that whole block and has retail active use in the ground floor of the space, we think is a better design and more supportive of the mixed use development.
Thank you.
To the chair, I have one additional comment for the applicants. Understanding that in your what you previously stated that you have been looking at changing the mixed use from residential to more commercial office space, but having seen in the last several months or at the beginning of this year the change in dynamics of corporations and corporations and businesses moving for a more telecommute type of landscape, do you see the use of the additional use of offices and commercial space to be used rather than having more access to housing or residential use?
Well, it's a great question as we're all sitting here in our homes, our bedrooms, our garages, taking these meetings. So these buildings will not be completed until sometime late in 2023. So at which time, hopefully we will have a vaccine and we will all be back out in the world, and hopefully we'll be able to work and see people in person. So it's an interesting conversation and one we're engaged in every day. Because right now what we're seeing is people actually are successfully working remotely, which it doesn't mean that there aren't a lot of people who are looking forward to going back to the office and being able to interact face to face with their colleagues. And so, and then there's the balance where tenants are talking about taking more space so that they can have greater social distancing from other people. So, you know, the trend particularly on the peninsula in the Silicon Valley has been to go to very, very dense office space where people are sitting right next to each other in a benching concept. Now people are really swinging back towards having spaces that are more you have more physical separation. So we think there's, you know, on the one hand, tenants could be looking for more space so that they can have more distance. And I think it's how the remote work plays out long term, I think is still to be determined. You know, one of the things that gives us confidence is we are still in a great location, in the Bay Area, in terms of the industries that are going to be viable in the future. Between technology and biotechnology, we think, you know, that these are uses that are going to be around and be vital and active going forward. And that, notwithstanding the fact that people may not want to get on Caltrain today, long term, having access to great public transportation will be extremely important to both residents and office users as they select where they want to live and work.
Okay. Any other questions, Commissioner Maldonado? Okay. Commissioner Ebneter, any questions for staff or applicant?
Thank you. Through the chair, thank you for the presentation, both staff and applicant. Lots of information presented nicely. Randall, I think one of your opening statements, or part of your opening statement, was MU2 and MU3 were designed as transitional lots between commercial and residential properties. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's true. So if you look at the layout, I think the intent of the layout of phase 2 generally is, the higher density office uses are located toward the west side, closer to the train station. So those are the station blocks 1 through 5, which are 100% office with some retail. Yeah. And then to the east are 100% residential uses, which are basically all built out in phase 2. And then in the middle is the mixed use blocks, which are a hybrid of the two uses. So it's a buffer between the office and the residential uses by being a combination of both.
Great, thank you. So for occupancy rate on a commercial site, what's the occupancy rate for tenant improvements in the city?
It's a better question for the building division. Unfortunately, we don't have a building department rep. The architect for the application may know if they'd like to chime in.
What was the question?
What is the occupancy rate
for commercial office? I think it's 100 1 per 100 square feet. So
you're at about 280,000 square feet, so you get about 2,800 workers possibly on site.
And that is
a building code metric.
Yeah.
100 square foot per person in reality is that would be an extreme dense tech environment. Yeah. I think office in general now, even in tech, is about 150. Traditional is in the 200 to 250.
Yeah, I agree. That's really a building code requirement.
That's a building.
And through the chair, I would also add that's about right. We've done studies before throughout the peninsula, and you look somewhere about the 1 per 200 range for employees for office square footage.
Okay, so maybe
that puts 1,500 people there.
Pardon me?
I'm sorry, thank you. And that was kind of the metric I was looking at too. That puts maybe 1,500 people in those office buildings.
Okay. And for the architect, can you explain to me, show me one more time, how these buildings are transitional specifically for the residential side? I gathered from your presentation how they interact with station 2, 3, and 4, yet not sure how they present so well, or how they present with R1, 4, and 6.
And I think if we go to I don't know who has the show anymore, but if we go to the Kind Street perspective, of anybody? What we've tried to do is give that side of the building a much more broken facade, and kind of tried to layer this roof overhang on it to give it a more residential feel on that side. So you see this facade has much more of a stepping back along the entire facade on that side, with this large eave that kind of hangs over the building there. And then we look to do more tactile kind of materials on that side, as well as setting the building back from the Kind Street edge there. So there's much more of a breakdown of that overall facade in terms of how the height is perceived, as well as opening up there where the entry on the backside of the lobby would be. In addition, the idea of having the outer play space for the for the potential childcare is right there on that side as well. So it helps with kind of that active use along Kine. So we think it's a much more residential feel on this side of the building than the front side, where it's pretty much more face forward to the street.
Okay.
Does that help?
For Janice, have there been other locations within Bay Meadows Phase 2 that child care has been proposed as part of the build out?
So we are super excited about doing a child care at Bay Meadows, and we have been approached in the past by child care providers. One of the challenges that we have had, though, is that we have not had a location that has the required outdoor space. And so that has been our limitation. So with this location, we do have the code required outdoor play space along with the interior space.
Okay. I'll get back to that in comments during the comment period, or maybe some more questions. So the residential component was originally, I think, 164 units, and they dropped 164 units for sale. And now there are 57 units for rent. What's driven you to the point of such a drastic swing in residential, and why are they now only rental?
So as it was explained previously, we do have the ability to pivot between commercial and residential on these mixed-use blocks. In addition, the underlying entitlements don't dictate whether the housing is for sale or for rent. So in both of those cases, I mean, they're great questions. In both of those cases, they're market-driven decisions. So for rent, we have a number of for rent buildings now at Bay Meadows. We have one, the Morgan, which is currently under construction and will be completed later this fall. And then the buildings known as Russell, Quimby, and Fieldhouse are rental buildings. And so one of the things that we have done in the design of the residential on MU3 is to develop a product type that is complementary to the other housing in the apartment collection at Bay Meadows. So those loft spaces are a different product than we've had in the past. And we do have a large number of for sale housing at Bay Meadows. So the townhomes and the single family homes are all for sale, all sold. And so we think that having a diversity between rental and for sale housing is a nice aspect of the community. And then with respect to the decision to build more office space, we think that the transit-oriented location with the Hillsdale Caltrain station directly across from these two blocks, we think it's a great location for office space. And we have been very pleased to be able to attract great users to the office space at Bay Meadows, including SurveyMonkey, OpenText, Guidewire, and others.
Thank you for that. I want to clarify that the size of the child care facility that is being discussed, it's 2,100 square feet or 21,000 square feet?
100.
2,100. Okay. I think that was my questions. Other than one other, possibly for the architect, I think at one point I saw where MU2 was originally proposed to curve with 28th Avenue. Is that correct?
Sorry, can you repeat that? I'm trying to...
Was MU2 originally supposed to follow the curvature of 28th Avenue?
I think that, yeah, it has a very, very slight curve on it. And we've kept it straight along that side. I think that it's almost too subtle to understand. And I'm not sure, somebody else would have to, I don't know if Rendell could talk about whether that we would be able to follow the curve along that side with the design guidelines or not. But we've kept it straight there along there.
Okay, the only reason I'm asking is you're the same firm that's done the architectural for the stations. Is that true?
No, we're not the same architect.
Oh, okay. I thought possibly you were. Rendell, do you know if there's? I mean, I like the different rounds that the different stations have brought in, the different curves. This probably is so subtle it wouldn't make a difference, correct?
I'd have to double check the 2008 SPAR plans to see if that was one of the exceptions. I think it was one of the exceptions that was approved. And if you look at the list of exceptions in this application, it is one of the requested exceptions to not follow that curve.
Okay, perfect. Those are my questions for now. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I had a couple questions, and then I do have a request from one of the commissioners to take a quick break, and then we'll go to public comment and wrap up the item. So I apologize to the attendees. A question for Rendell. Station 1 and Station 5, there were design changes either last year or the year before to change the mix of retail and commercial. Is that correct?
Yes. So Station 1 had originally an above ground garage facility. And so that was eliminated and put below ground, and additional office was approved at Station 1, which is the northernmost site. The southernmost site at Station 5, yes, also increasing office. But Station 5, I believe, and Janice, you can correct me if I'm wrong, it does have a retail active use component on the ground floor, but not at Station 1.
So that's correct, Randall. The previous SPAR for Station 1 did include retail and the ground floor. The current approved plan, building that's under construction, does not have retail on Station 1. We still have retail in Station 5.
Okay. Do you recall how much commercial real estate square footage was added from the modification of the SPARs for Station 1 and 5?
We roughly doubled the office space. So it was approximately 180,000 square feet of additional office space.
So 180K additional office space. Whereas this one for mixed use 2 and mixed use 3 is adding roughly
317,000 square feet.
Incremental 317, or that's the total?
No, that's the total. That's
yeah,
the total.
So it's adding about 300, 280, something like
280.
That. Okay. So 180K commercial real estate square footage added for the Station 1 and Station 5, and another 280 for this request.
So it brings the total office space to 1.2 million square feet.
Right. So you would be under that. You would be under $1 million before these design changes?
We are just a little bit over $1 million. We would be, because we have at Stations 1 through 5, we have, Elizabeth, you can jump in here for me. I think we're roughly 970,000 square feet.
That's about right. Sorry, it's just shy of $1 million.
But the range the minimum was $1 million, right? From the original project parameters. It was between $1 million and 1.5.
The minimum commercial square footage is 500,000, and the base program allows up to 1.25 million at the middle range, and the low range of commercial is $1 million. And if they maximize commercial, it's 1.5 million.
Okay. Yeah, I'm looking at the staff memo, second page, and it says base program is 1.25 square feet for CRE. And it could be anywhere between $1 million and 1.5. It just seems like before this request, perhaps they weren't even getting to $1 million. Unless I'm misreading something.
Through the chair, it looks like it's going to be roughly 1.3 after this build out.
I thought it was 1.2. Okay, so it was right around $1 million before this. Okay. Thank you, John. Rendell, does this project have a requirement does Bay Meadows development have a requirement for a certain percentage of low-income housing like other developments do outside of Bay Meadows?
Yes, so phase 2 was entitled with a development agreement, and that requires a minimum of 10% being set aside to the moderate or lower income household units. And that's in addition to the 100% affordable site that was added as a public benefit at the Bridge Housing site.
So is it fair to say that with this request, they're reducing 107 residential units from the SPAR that was previously approved? So that's basically a loss of 11 affordable housing units?
Yeah, assuming that's true, assuming the developer was providing just the minimum. They can still exceed the minimum even within the number that they're proposing, within the 57.
Okay. Are there, with regard to the exceptions to the design guidelines that were previously approved in SPAR number 1, and there was some documentation provided in the study session materials. And this might be a question more for Gabrielle, but are the exceptions to design guidelines, are any of those mandated under any kind of state requirements, or were those all discretionary by the city government to approve the exceptions? So in other words, when we get a lot of our developments, a number of the exceptions are not subjective. Is that the case?
Are you thinking of the Housing Accountability Act?
That's right. Yes, that's right. Does any of that apply to these?
So this project has special design guidelines that are layered on top of the state law. And so the applicant and the city agreed to abide by the design guidelines for this project when it was originally approved. And so those guidelines do speak to the ability to change some of the characteristics of the designs. And it describes some guidelines as being mandatory and some as being voluntary. And so different guidelines can be changed more easily than others.
Okay, but in the case of this project modification, the requested exceptions to the design guidelines, those are all now back out on the table for approval, right?
Right.
They don't carry forward. Okay. A question for the applicant. How many residential units are in mixed use 4?
Sorry, coming off mute.
No problem.
I believe it's 84.
So 84 units in mixed use 4.
Oh, excuse me, mixed use 4. I'm sorry, I was thinking of mixed use Res 4, which is the Morgan, which is currently under construction. It's about 80. I would have to look up. I can't remember the exact number, but
and that's the Quimby, right?
That's the Quimby, yes.
Okay, I like that name. Sounds smart. The
We're still in pilot.
Oh, okay, excellent. So mixed use 4 has 80 residential units. Mixed use 1 has none, right?
Mixed use 1 has 68 affordable.
68. Mixed use 1 has 68.
Correct.
And then mixed use 2 originally approved to have 88 units. Now it's 0. And mixed use 3 originally approved to have 76 units. Now it's 57. Is that right?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay. What percentage of affordable housing do you have in these different, like, so when we look at mixed use 1 through 4, what's the percentage of affordable housing that is reflected in each of those?
We're at 10% within each of the residential blocks at Bay Meadows. I mean, we round up, so it's not exactly 10%. The bridge housing development was able to avail themselves of the state density bonus, which we are precluded from doing at our project at Bay Meadows for the market rate blocks.
Okay. Okay, so you're doing the design guideline set forth. I think Rendell mentioned it was 10% was the minimum, and that is the percentage that the mixed use blocks are providing. Okay, so it is with your proposed modification, that does reflect a drop of 11 units of affordable housing, right?
Correct.
Okay.
I think it's around 11.
It'd be 10 or 11, I think.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, those are my questions. Did any other commissioners have any questions before we take a quick break? And then we will go to public comment. Any other questions before? Okay, seeing none, we'll just take a couple-minute break. Again, I had a request from one of the commissioners. We'll take a couple-minute break, and then we'll come back and we'll pick up on public comment on this consent calendar item.
Just a friendly reminder to participants that while we are on break, attendees will still be able to hear you if your microphones are not muted. So please be sure to disable your cameras and mute your microphones.
Thank you, Aaron. Okay. Okay, when the other commissioners are ready, we'll pick up the meeting.
If I was corrected, MU4 is 70 units.
Okay, I see Commissioner Ebner's back, Commissioner Mallory, Commissioner Williams, Commissioner Maldonado's back. Okay, terrific. Let's go ahead and restart the meeting. So we have had the staff and applicant presentation on consent calendar item 3, Bay Meadows Phase 2 SPAR number 1, MU2. There are 2 ways to participate if anybody would like to provide public comment on this agenda item. One is to join the Zoom meeting by clicking on the link at the top of the agenda. Use the raise your hand button to be called on at the appropriate time. Oh, let me start my video, sorry. To be called on at the appropriate time. The other way is for phone-in participation, which can be done by calling 408-638-0968 with the conference ID number 817-8950-6746 and press star 9 to raise your hand to be called on. Okay, so we'll go ahead and go to public comment.
The first participant with their hand raised is Adam Lorraine. Adam Lorraine, can you hear us?
Yes. Test?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes. Hello, Adam.
Hooray. Good evening, Planning Commission and staff and applicant. I just wanted to give a quick public comment as a resident of San Mateo for 20 plus years who appreciates transit-oriented development and maximizing affordable housing in our city. First, I want to thank Chair Etheridge for asking a number of clarifying questions that I think bring a bit of added context to this change and how it's not the first change, but rather a subsequent change to the overall makeup of the mixed use in this development. And it's another, additional step toward more office space and overall fewer homes, which is disappointing to me as a San Mateo resident. I think when we just, from the quick math based on what was just transpiring in the previous questions, we saw that just a few years ago, this development was slated to have about 750,000 square feet or so of office space. And since the 2018 changes to Station 1 and 5 and the changes being brought before the commission tonight, we're up to closer to the near maximum of the base of 1.2 million. And then we've lost 107-ish units in housing. And as Chair Etheridge noted through the questions, that means we're losing some affordable units as well. And, to me, that's, maybe we're losing about 10% on that front and gaining about 60% office space after all is said and done. So I think, I imagine a number of people who bought into Bay Meadows were expecting something different. And while I understand the market forces, et cetera, it's just disappointing. It's just too bad. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your comment.
My next speaker is Claire Lua. Claire, can you unmute your microphone, please?
Yep. Hi,
okay.
Dear commissioners, thank you for letting me speak. I appreciate you guys taking the time, especially late into the evening, so really thank you. So I'm Claire Lua. I'm the president of Meadow Walk Homeowners Association, and Meadow Walk is a part of Bay Meadows, where this development is at. So residents have been looking forward to having more restaurant and retail options and being able to walk to these amenities. So honestly, it has been quite disappointing to get the news that there are plans to reduce these facilities that will make Bay Meadows a true transit-oriented development. I have a couple of points to make. First, I would strongly urge the Commission to look into the meeting notes from September 25th in 2018, where the developers came to the city to ask to reduce retail space for Station 5. At that time, the developers had indicated that it is okay to reduce retail space in Station 5 because there's going to be more retail space because these two buildings today, MU2 and MU3, will have retail space. So now they are actually reducing it, going back on their original statements. It's actually quite concerning that the developer is allowed to keep going back on some of these previous statements. So I'm just wondering, is the city essentially legally compelled to approve any changes in plans as long as it meets the minimum retail space requirements? From a previous community meeting, the developer have expressed that they have already met the minimum requirements, and it seems like they're only interested in meeting the bare minimum requirements. So there's essentially a very fine balance between retail, housing, and offices in a transit-oriented development. If we continue to convert retail space to offices, then residents will be forced to drive and commute for facilities. Were there any study done on how reducing retail will affect the driving patterns in the community? And essentially, what analyses and studies have been done here to ensure that the balance of a transit-oriented development can be maintained? The other thing is that childcare was brought up as something that all residents really wanted. The concern that I have is that there's only childcare space for 2,100 square feet. That's space for about 26 children and space of a 4-bedroom home. Was there any study or survey done to understand how much childcare is needed in the community? If everyone needs to drive out to drop off their kids, doesn't it kind of defeat the purpose of a transit-oriented development since no one can use the Caltrain anymore? And I also have some questions on this change, which is, do developers generally have a higher profit for office space compared to retail or housing space? Will this change to reduce retail and housing mean that Wilson Meany will get a higher profit margin out of Bay Meadows? So in general, I find that the use of market forces, meaning that maybe it's difficult to find retail tenants, as Wilson Meany might have said before, but I find that logic confusing because it's not essentially that they cannot find a retail tenant, it is that they cannot find a retail tenant at the price that they want. If they lower the retail rental price, they would have been able to find a retail tenant. So it's kind of like me saying that I cannot find a tenant for my home.
Okay, Ms. Lua, let's try and wrap up in the next 15 seconds, please.
Okay, sure. So I can understand, it's like I can understand why developers want to do it to like reduce housing and retail. The financial upside makes sense, but I'm just wondering what is the benefits to San Mateo City for doing this? And what are the tangible benefits to the city for reducing housing, reducing retail in favor of more offices?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for sharing your public comments. Next commenter.
Jason Paik, I've just unmuted your microphone. You can speak now.
Commissioners, hello. My name is Jason Pack. I'm a resident of Bay Meadows neighborhood. I do want to echo some of the comments that my neighbor Claire have made, and I find it, I'm a little concerned that justification is made to increase the office space in Bay Meadows because of its proximity to Caltrain, where the same rationale can be utilized to increase the amount of housing. I actually don't think that there is much of a difference in this justification, except that maybe one might be more profitable than the other. And I understand that this is not our property and this is a development, and these folks are a business and they're good folks in general. But I find it, but it's up to you as the commission to make the decision as to whether or not to prioritize profits over what is good for the city, as Claire has clearly pointed out. I think that in general, for the residents who live here, who we are your bosses in some ways, that we would like to preserve the residential nature of this neighborhood, and furthermore, to in some ways help also our other neighbors in San Mateo with regards to the housing crisis that is prevalent in our communities across the entire peninsula. So it's just fine. I find it to be, again, disappointing that this proposal is being made. At the very least, I would ask the Planning Commission to strongly consider retaining residential property facing Kine Boulevard. And I mean, if you want to compromise, I think that's up to you. But in general, again, sacrificing housing, especially when it's so close to Caltrain, the residents who will be moving into these homes, which are mostly smaller in size and perhaps designed for folks who don't have as high of an income, that's extremely important for them to access transit in that way. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you, Jason, for your public comment.
Our next speaker is Patrick Lamb. Patrick, can you hear us?
Hi, I'm Stephanie, and I'm one of the homeowners here in Bay Meadows, and I just want to express my support for something like the childcare facility and the mixed-use building. I think that's something that we definitely need, especially for homeowners here in Bay Meadows. So yeah, that's all.
Okay, thank you for your comment, Stephanie.
At this time, I see no more hands raised.
Okay, anybody else on the Zoom call that would like to make a public comment on this item? Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and close the public comment on this item, and we will go back to commission for final comments and observation on the study session. We're not taking a vote on anything. Who would like to speak first? Okay, we'll start with Commissioner Williams.
Okay, hi.
I went by seniority, sorry.
Or lack of seniority.
Yeah.
Well, okay, thank you everybody for the presentations. This is very helpful, and I particularly always, as always, appreciate the public comments as well. I do think that our public comments, although there weren't very many, they were very strong and specific, and I thought they brought up some good points. That the reduction in housing units is unfortunate, and that reduced retail is also a little bit unfortunate, and that particularly with reference to the previous project. The childcare comment was interesting because it does seem like that was a very good point. I just want to mention that I thought that was a great point, that in transit-oriented development, if you have to get in your car to take your child to daycare, that's kind of defeats the purpose. So I appreciate that. As far as the items that are were asked to consider tonight, the items for discussion, one was the building design and the massing and the materials, and the other was related to the design exceptions. I think they're interesting projects. The combination at first seemed a little incongruous and challenging. Brought to mind another project that we've seen where it was sort of commercial on the front side on one street and residential on the other. In this case, I particularly like the residential project, so I think they blend pretty well. The commercial projects I thought were actually at first glance, as I first got into the packet, the materials, it reminded me of there's a very glassy cube-like building at the University of Oregon, the Jacqua building, I think it's called. But after looking at it in more detail, I see, I mean, that's a very unique, cube-shaped glass building. But I see that there's a lot more to this, and I think there's you know, there's a good mix of materials. There's a good breakup of the massing of the building, and so I think it works in a lot of ways. Couple things. I think that it would be nice to see one of the comments, I think, or the design guidelines, I guess, was that there should be a breakdown of the glass and metal panels with some vertical elements. I almost feel like that could be a little bit stronger. If you look at the elevations of the exterior elevations, there's pretty limited kind of vertical metal panels. So that could be a little bit stronger. I think, let's see, other comments about the materials, I guess. The concrete material at the base was kind of a strong element. I think that's what differentiates it from the one at the building I referenced, where, you know, there is really this kind of like recessed base and then the glassy portion. And I think that's working pretty well. I think the wood is referenced in the documents, but I'm not sure how much anyone's gonna see that. I wish there was a little bit more opportunity to introduce like that wood soffit is difficult to really see. I don't think there's going to be, I mean, you know, it's a soffit at the top of the roof. So I think generally, because the massing there's been some attention to the massing and breaking it up and not just being a box, that is working pretty well. One place where I think it could be improved upon is, I think it's MU2, the one to the north. The courtyard that's there, could we have a site plan on screen while we talk? Like the one that shows, MU2 is the one to the north, right? Anyway, it might help. The kind of courtyard, I feel like, is rather deep and not, it's deeper than it is wide. Yeah, there we go. That's what I wanted to show. I wonder if that would feel a little more inviting. Again, as I said, I walked down the street today looking at it, and of course the buildings on the station buildings on the other side of the street are much wider than they are deep in terms of the open space, and they're extremely inviting. And the courtyard for MU2 that we're seeing, the sort of slot, I mean, architecturally it's kind of interesting, but in terms of, you know, kind of user, you know, the pedestrian experience, it feels a little stark and like deep and a little bit deep and narrow. I know it's not that narrow, but it feels a little bit compared to what's across the street. So I don't know if there's any way to open that up a bit. Let's see, I think those were generally my comments with regards to massing and materials. With regards to the design exceptions, I think I realized that there were pages of design exceptions, but they were all related to the other, like many other buildings. So just looking at the items that are associated with MU2 and MU3, I think they generally make sense and they are acceptable with a couple of comments. 28th Avenue is the one that goes by Nueva School, right? And that, so the build to zone and holding the corners along there, I feel like it actually makes sense to kind of pull that back a little bit. I feel like that this creates a pretty urban setting for a high school that hasn't been urban, you know, hasn't been had that feel until these buildings are built. So I feel like softening up that elevation a little bit for not just the residents, but the students, the people across the street from that elevation might help. And so pulling it back a little bit at some portion not necessarily buildings to the zone. Yeah, exactly. So the two groups of people across the street from MU2 is a high school that has no longer all the open space that it used to have, and then residential affordable housing that that's also going to be, this is going to be a prominent feature. So I would consider looking at that elevation in a little more detail. Let's see. Otherwise, I think most everything else made sense. Oh, I did have a question or a comment, I guess. The required 3-block pedestrian easement is covered by 2 pedestrian bridges. So do we have pedestrian bridges still on this, on MU3? I guess we do, yes. Okay, I'm just realizing that's because the walkthrough is, I guess the building goes over it. So that makes sense. I think, so in summary, I would say that the design exceptions that are being requested in terms of the specific design items, not in terms of the program of the buildings, but because when you say design exceptions, you're talking about specific elements of the building. I do not take exception to them. I think you're generally in the right direction with the exception of the comments that I made. Hopefully that makes sense. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Williams. Who would like to speak next? Final comments on this item. Can we go to you, Commissioner Maldonado?
I'll go, Mike. Oh, there
Thank you. Thank you.
Understand that this conversation is about the building design and also the design kind of exemption. I'm very disappointed how in that the applicant was able to just take out housing, and especially affordable housing, from this proposal. Understanding, yes, that it is a mixed use with the potential that it can change from residential to commercial to retail, but I walk that neighborhood on a fair regular basis, walking my dog. And I do see that neighborhood does need some more type of residential and also some retail space. I think it down the street, it does have an abundance of commercial space. And I think that we're going to be seeing now as some large tech companies and large Fortune 500 companies start moving to the concept of more telecommuting and using less commercial space to do their daily work. I think what this pandemic taught everyone is that we have to adjust to what the times are now, and taking prime real estate on us, on the city, where we can use additional housing, because we are in an area where we're in a housing deficit, and then going and taking about 90 or so complexes away to add more commercial space, I think is doing ill service for the city, for the residents, for public service as well. But we're here to talk about the design, the building design. I've always been a fan of glass. I've always been a fan of that glass metallic natural finish, because that brings in more natural light. I'm always looking at the actual presentation and the documents. I was in awe of how much glass is being used. I believe down the street there, I believe it's the Open Tech or the Survey Monkey building that has a lot more glass facade and exterior. I'm in a great favor of that. It's simple. It's simple. Has a chromatic palette. which I think blends in with all the other buildings in the neighborhood. I encourage the applicant to do what's needed to have that child care facility. I know on the documents and her description, it says a possible child care facility. So I encourage that if they could do as much as possible to bring that that care center to the neighborhood. The design of the actual residential units, I enjoy that walkthrough that I believe in MU3 from the residential units, you can walk straight into the park, to the Landing Green Park, which is also a dog park as well. I liked in the residential units where the unit itself has an actual, it's very family and very pet friendly. I believe I saw in the documents that I even had a dog washing station as well inside the unit as well. So I'm encouraged of, I really hope that it had more residential units like that on M2 and not just on M3. But overall, I like the overall design. I don't have any concerns about the building exemptions, as some of these exemptions were approved in the SPAR 1 application, but understanding that the application was more tied to residential and retail more less than commercial, as what this this new design being presented to us is. So I think overall, Mike, I like the overall design. I'm disappointed that it is less residential and less retail as it was originally planned in 2008. But as the design, as it sits now, is a very great design. It's will blend in very well with the surrounding communities. And yep, I believe that is it. And I have no other reservations on the exemptions on the design guidelines of exemptions.
Okay, thank you, Romero. Commissioner Abinader.
Through the chair. I've had the pleasure of reviewing numerous projects at Bay Meadows 2, and for the most part, I have always been complimentary of the programming, the architect, and the end products. I think everything has been very high quality, including the wonderful open spaces and parks. Great jobs throughout. I was a little concerned when Station 1 and 5 were drastically added commercial space. It seemed like a push at that time, and I know that there was some public pushback on it, yet it went through, it's been approved, and those projects are moving forward. These MU2 and MU3, I think are a little different story compared to ST1 and 5, which are solely commercial, and granting that those variances and agreeing that the additional space was appropriate, where I don't see that argument valid for MU2 and MU3. I'd like to start briefly with the child care facility. I have had the proposed child care facility. I've had the pleasure of remodeling 10 or 12 full-scale child care facilities. Each one of them has ranged from 12 to 15,000 square feet with the appropriate play areas associated. Spoke with a good friend of mine who is a child care developer nationally, went over the scope of this project with him today, and he felt it was very questionable that you could do any feasible child care facility in 2,100 square feet. Depending on what you are trying to do, you've got to have bathrooms, break rooms for staff. You have to have locations for staff to do their administrative work. You've got to have an indoor play area. And if you are actually going to be using an outside public facility for some of your play, you have to now disinfect it on a daily basis prior to using it. The state of California will grant a 50% reduction in the outdoor requirement play facility, yet you have to accommodate that on the inside. Also, new because of the COVID recommendations, the classroom sizes have been reduced down to 12 students. I'm sitting in my house this afternoon, which is only about 1,500 square feet. I'm trying to imagine how 26 to 30 children are going to be accommodated in a space that's only 500 more square feet than mine. It doesn't seem feasible. I do like the effort. I'd like to know how that would be achievable. As there concerns about the retail space, which we unfortunately hear the same arguments on a very regular basis, no matter where it is in the city. I think that one of the public commenters, Claire, very succinctly put together what a neighborhood needs and how it functions and the importance of a balance between commercial, residential, and retail. I can't say it any better than her, yet I feel that really to make this a community, you've got to take some chances. You've got to work to make all of the components come together in the appropriate manner, in the right locations, and work towards a complete community, not one that is weighted with one component, in this case, commercial, at the expense of the neighborhoods. The Hillsdale Mall is very close, yet as we all know, they're looking at some major changes themselves, as are all malls in the United States, that are trying to figure out what they're going to do with their large acreage. And most of them, if they can, are going to mixed use, including a lot of residential. I would hope that Wilson Meany would consider looking at the retail as a benefit for their projects and not as a detraction to their bottom line. The drastic changes in this lot, or these two lots, have really overridden my concerns about the building design and the exceptions to the design guidelines. As I noted earlier, I'm a huge fan of this development. I think the work out there is fantastic. Yet, I'm saddened that the public's input and desire here in San Mateo, which has been documented in a recent poll, 70% of the people in San Mateo say affordable housing is their #1 concern. They have not said they need 320,000 more square feet of commercial space. They've said adamantly over and over again, we need housing. Wilson Meany can go ahead with these projects and eliminate housing at the expense of their goodwill to the community. This city is dying to do something about their housing shortfalls. And I really feel that this type of substantial change in taking over 100 units out of the mix is completely against what we are asking our developers to do. I've never seen one study where people were anxious to build more commercial at the expense of residential. You know, looking at the square footage and thinking that there could be anywhere from 15 to a minimum 1,500 to 1,800 new employees at this site, then what you're really doing is you're adding more to the burden of the housing stock drastically. You've taken 100 out and you're adding potentially 1,800 people who would want to live there. So the math is backwards about where we're trying to go. We've got RENA numbers that are going to come into this city soon, which are going to send our city leaders looking for a variety of locations where they can meet the state mandated RENA numbers, and to pull items off of the list now, to me, is counterintuitive of where we need to go as a city. Part of the pandemic issue has been brought up. And, you know, when it started, I kind of thought that commercial space might be an important component to look at, mostly because of the additional space needed for our own personal safety. Yet, I think that's a short-sighted view. I think if you take a long-term view at these properties, how are you going to best service the best interests for the citizens of San Mateo? And that would be housing. If anything has been clearly painted to us through this pandemic, is that the lack of affordable housing has drastically exposed numerous sectors of our society through their overcrowded housing conditions to this disease. I am not expecting or asking Wilson Meany to solve our social injustices at MU3 and MU2. But what I would ask of them is to seriously consider what the citizens of San Mateo have basically made their number one item, which is more housing, and see if you can make that work here at MU2 and MU3 and bring some more residential units online. As far as the exceptions to the design guidelines, I see no problem with them at all. I'm usually a fan of glass, but in this case, I think it's too much. I think the properties across Delaware, which have incorporated some stone, which have incorporated some wood, which have larger courtyards, are a better product, better looking product. But again, that isn't my concern with this project. And I'm hoping that we can come to a better understanding and grasp of what the city really needs. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Ebneter, for those comments. I apologize, my headphone ran out of battery, so I had to switch back to the external microphone.
we will go to Vice Chair Mallory's final comments on the project.
Thank you, Mike. Very hard act to follow with the previous three commissioners. So thank you all for all of your thoughts on this project. I really appreciated the presentations from the applicant and from Rendell. And I very much appreciated hearing from the people who called in and those who live in Bay Meadows and are walking the talk on what's going on there. So it's very, very helpful to hear from everybody who calls in. I too went over there today and was wandering around and driving around that area. And what I really appreciate was what we had discussed the last time we talked about Bay Meadows as a commission and the buildings that are along the Caltrain tracks. And as we all know, I'm not a big fan of modern architecture, but I really, really like the buildings in that Bay Meadows development. And they all flow very well as far as style, and they all look pretty terrific. So as I was thinking, as I was driving around, I was visualizing in the empty lots what it was going to look like to have the buildings there. And it struck me that that area is a real transition, because the housing units that are behind that, the Landing Green Park, those are so residential, big residential area. And then you come across the open lots and you see the station buildings, and those are very commercial. So this is such an opportunity to present a transition between the residential and the commercial. So when I was thinking about it and I was looking at the drawings with the housing unit along the back of MU3 and the removal of houses on MU2, I thought maybe we could consider putting some back into MU2 and really having that space be a real transition. And then I was thinking also about the increase of the commercial space versus the residential. And we've heard from our other speakers about the detriment of removing housing from the stock. And as I thought about it, I wanted to just pose one good thing about it, given the situation in the city with the result of COVID and the reduced tax income. Increased commercial will up the tax base. So that is one thing to think about. It doesn't make up for the housing, but it is something to think about. And I would like to say too that Ms. Thatcher mentioned, and I wanted to reiterate that the increase of people in the commercial buildings during the day will enable retail to be a little bit more successful than it is now. And I remember when we were discussing this before, that the empty retail spaces were a real issue, and it was difficult to get people willing to come in and take the risk. It's necessary for them to come in and take the risk. So maybe with a little more people there during the day using the restaurants and maybe shopping on their lunch hour, it might prove to be a real benefit to the people in the residential areas. So I'm trying to look at both pros and cons to what we heard tonight. I will comment on the buildings, and I was not supportive of the current design. I think I would have liked to have seen more color like we saw in the station buildings, and a little more other shapes and sizes. The massing was fine, but I agree with Margaret that the entry, the long, narrow entry, wasn't as inviting as the wider ones on the other buildings. So a little more color and a little less glass I'd like to see there. I did really like the wood that was used on the outside. I thought that was very pretty. The Kind Street residential, there's a white residential building facing that that development when it goes in. So I don't know how I feel about that necessarily. It's two white buildings facing each other. I think I might have liked to have seen some other colors besides just white and black. But I do appreciate all the thought process that went into all of the building and the lofts and things like that. It was an interesting building. I don't have a problem with the guidelines at all. I think we've covered all that. And I think that's all I have to share tonight. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Vice Chair Mallory. Okay, so on the two items, so thank you again to everybody who presented and spoke. So on the building design, I'll start with that. So this is a very contemporary architectural style. Normally, you know, I'm a generally fan of modern architecture, contemporary architecture. In this case, you know, with the amount of glass that's there and the metal and the concrete on the ground floor, I feel like it oversteers. You know what? I don't live in the Bay Meadows community, but I've frequented quite a bit, and it doesn't seem to fit in to that larger residential community. Those designs that have been presented in our materials then tonight, it doesn't seem to fit into the larger community to my eye. Normally, I'm a fan of the more modern, sleek architecture, but in this case, again, I feel it oversteers. I'm speaking primarily about the commercial real estate facing side on Delaware. Like Commissioner Williams mentioned, I do like the wood paneling that was showed. I actually thought that was a nice touch, but there was very little of it. So I would like to see it softened. And on the Kind Street side, on the, I think it was MU3, that had the residential side of it, I actually really like that canopy element. I thought that was a pretty cool addition, a visual addition from the Landing Green Park. So those are my comments on the building design. With regard to the design guidelines exception, the preliminary requested exception, you know, the exceptions that are there to build the zone, the massing, the curb cuts, the setback intrusion, you know, even noting a couple of positives from increased commercial that Vice Chair Mallory mentioned, which I do agree. There's always there's a bright side to every story, but I have a hard time supporting the exceptions that had previously been approved for what was meant to be more of a balanced commercial, retail, residential. I have a hard time taking a look at those design guideline, you know, those requested exceptions and supporting those with the, you know, extreme proposed modifications to the design that are here. You know, no question, Bay Meadows is a successful project with a 20+ year history. You know, it has a great community, a growing community, and it added some higher density housing, much needed housing to the city. But I feel like the applicants oversteered in recent years to the commercial real estate side. We had the two buildings, Station 1 and Station 5, had design changes to increase commercial real estate, added 180,000 more commercial real estate and a significant decrease in residential. And I think it was one of the callers that mentioned that that was one of the reasons that was, when it was proposed was, but there's more, there's more retail coming for the mixed use buildings. But now we have, a pretty significant requested change on mixed use 2 and 3 to add another 280,000 square feet of commercial real estate and more drop in retail. And I just feel like, again, looking at that, those buildings and the place that they have in that community, which is the bridge from the commercial side where the train station and the El Camino corridor to the residential side, it's oversteering. But it's not the commercial real estate increase that is concerning to me as it is the changes to the residential units. So we already, so as I discussed with the applicant, so we already have, mixed use 1 with 68 units, mixed use 4 with 70 units, and we were going to have mixed use 2 and 3 with, 88 units and mixed use 2, 76 units and mixed use 3. Now the proposed design change is going to 0 in mixed use 2 and 57 units in mixed use 3. So that's 107 units that have disappeared in the proposed modification. And more importantly, it's 11 units of affordable housing. And when you think about, when you think about requested exceptions to the design guidelines, and again, I'm speaking for myself, when I look at supporting exceptions, the intended use of the development and the building is absolutely a factor. So I'll have a different lens depending on what the use of it is. Looking at the numbers in the guidelines that Rendell shared, it looks like the applicant can reduce the housing and still be over the minimum. They can increase the commercial real estate and still be under the maxing. They could do both of those, but should they? Is that in the best interest of this city? And I'm not even getting into the question marks around commercial real estate in a COVID-19 environment, because who knows what that looks like in a couple of years. There are some studies that say it could be a V-shaped recovery and everything's back to normal and there's a vaccine. There are other people that are saying this is going to go on. So this isn't about the current state of things. It's more around the bigger picture and what is best for this community, in my view. So I feel like this, this tilts that stretch of the Bay Meadows community to full-on office park. I don't feel like it's the type of development changes that San Mateo needs. I strongly encourage the applicant to think about reincorporating some residential units back into mixed use 2, even if it is less than what had previously been approved. And those are my comments.
Through the chair, can staff briefly respond to some of the comments on the housing and commercial program?
Okay.
Briefly. Thank you.
Is the study session?
I'm sorry?
Is the study session? So
I have to ask. I appreciate it. So the applicant, had described the market reasoning behind the choice to reduce housing and increase commercial. Just wanted to clarify the level of discretion the city has in the, balance of housing and commercial. I know it's understood by the commission, but it's worth stating again, the required findings for approval are anticipated to be the SPAR findings, site plan architectural review, which require conformance to adopted code and policies, harmony with the environment and the neighborhood. City staff is cognizant and the applicant is cognizant of the public and the commission's comments with the reduction of housing and retail and the increase in office. But the specific one doesn't provide a high level of discretion or provide the city with an ability to require more housing, unless they were under the minimums. And as we saw this evening, the minimum and maximum land uses appear to be conformed with as set forth by the specific plan amendment and as a result of the project. The modifications requesting exceptions to the guidelines, not the land use requirements. So it's just want to make that known for the public and the applicant's benefit.
Okay, thank you, Rendell. Okay, so we will close that item number 3, the public hearing, and we will go to new business. Item 4, which is the election of officers. Did you want to say anything, Aaron, before we go to the nominations?
No, I think you go forward. I mean, obviously, this is the first time we're doing nominations in a virtual format, so it's a little bit different than normal, but the procedure itself is the same as it has been in the past and is outlined in the staff report.
Okay. Do we have any commissioners to put forth a nomination for chair?
Through the chair.
Through the chair.
We'll go John first. He said
you go, John.
Sorry. I would like to nominate Alan Mallory for chair of the Planning Commission.
And I second that. I second that nomination. Can we, Ellen, do you accept that nomination?
I will tell you that I have so much respect for my fellow commissioners and this staff, and I would do it with pleasure.
All right, excellent. Well, let's have a roll call vote then for the nomination for Ellen Mallory as chair.
Commission Chair Etheridge?
Yes.
Vice Chair Mallory?
I'll abstain.
Commissioner Ebnetter?
Yes.
Commissioner Maldonado?
Yes.
Commissioner Williams?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So Ellen is the new chair on a 4-0 vote with 1 abstain. Do we have a nomination for vice chair for the next year?
I would like to nominate Ramiro Maldonado.
Okay, I will second that. Ramiro, are you, do you accept the nomination for vice chair?
Yes, I accept the nomination.
Okay, excellent. Can we have a roll call vote, please? See how easy this is?
Commission Chair Etheridge?
Yes.
Vice Chair Mallory?
Yes.
Commissioner Ebnetter?
Yes.
Commissioner Maldonado?
Abstain.
Commissioner Williams?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so Commissioner Maldonado is the vice chair. So looking forward to the next year with both of you. The Planning Commission is in very good hands.
Mike, thank you for your service this year. You have been an outstanding chair. You run wonderful meetings. You have done an excellent job with the public and the staff, and we all appreciate it.
You're here.
Yeah, I concur. I second that.
It's gotten less awkward over time, I will say that. These virtual meetings, it's still some work to go. Okay, excellent. Do we have any reports and announcements, Aaron?
Yes, just give a heads up to the commission and to the public on Monday night, the 29th of June, there's a special city council meeting. There'll be 2 planning related items. The first is related to the Concar Passage development. The city council will be reviewing a couple options related to community benefits for the development. So that's something that I think a lot of people have interest in. The second is a more minor item, and it relates to potential changes to the pre-application process, but only for projects that are proposing modifications, minor modifications to previously approved projects. So just something to expedite the overall process, but that'll be under consideration also by the council. That's it.
Okay, excellent. Did anybody else have any reports and announcements? Okay, excellent. Well, thank you all. And we will adjourn the meeting.
Good night.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you guys. Take care.
Good night.